back in the early 50s, actually about 1950, I was in New York City. I lived in Maine, had a laboratory there, was doing animal work and human work, and Faraday cage and so on and so on. And I was young, I didn't know that much, you know. A lot of brass, but not knowledge. So one of the things that happened was I was in New York City, and I went to a reception given by a very famous lady in parapsychology at that time named Mrs. Uri Geller. And she had as a visiting guest from India, a nice little guy in a narrow jacket and so on, with glasses, and you know, it could have been anybody's uncle. It was nothing conspicuous. And he was very quiet, and we met in the corner, and I asked him, you know, what he does, and so on. He's from the University of Pune, and he's here on a peace mission, and so on and so on. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm studying parapsychology and trying to find out the ultimate reaches of the mind so I can finally design a brain. I mean, that's where my head was in those days, right? And so he said, well, we must get together. I said, how long are you going to be in the country? Oh, he said, I'll be here for about 6 months, and maybe I'll get a renewal. So I said, fine, I'll get together with you. Well, I left them, and other events intervened. 6 months went by, a year went by. And every once in a while I think, gee, maybe I would call him up, but I didn't. So one day I was up in upper Westchester County area visiting with the former Vice President of the United States. Henry Wallace was a good friend of mine. We did a lot of agricultural experiments together. And we got stuck a little bit on the statistics of an experiment we were running, so I missed the train I was going to take back to New York City. And I missed it by about 2 hours, and I did have an appointment in New York City. So he rushed me to the nearest town, which was Pleasantville, New York, known for Reader's Digest, put me on a train there, and I got on the train, and I sat down, kind of running all day, you know. And the last guy gets on the train, he comes late, and it's this Dr. Vinod. He sits next to me, he says, oh, he says, time for us, you know, the Indians talk a little high-pitched voice, and say, it's time we ought to get together, right? I said, you know, I guess so. We've been caught up with. Make a long story short, I invited him up to my laboratory in Maine, which is near Rockland, and he came in by plane. One of my colleagues had picked him up. He walked into the house, which is a very famous Stanford White place, huge, and walked into the library and sat down, and without giving us any warning, went into trance and started speaking. We are 9 principles and forces, personalities, if you wish, and we planned this to the ultimate, blah, 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 blah. And they start telling us about who they were and the history, and if they were interested in helping us to further evolution. Okay, that's how it all got started. And so we got excited about this because it seemed like very high quality information, particularly the mathematics, which some of it to this day we have not solved, I might add, almost 30 years later. And I then began to learn about the big problem of peace and danger of nuclear war, and Dr. Vinod took me down to Washington and taught me how to meditate on the whole congressional hall, and you know, how to calm their feelings of the president, blah, blah, blah. I went through this whole training period for about a year, and then my colleagues joined me, and Dr. Vinod went back to India, and that was the end of talking to the 9, because he was sole source. I later found out from his wife and from his sons who went to Princeton and somewhere else to get PhDs that he had never done trance work. He was a religious leader besides being a professor in India, but he had never done anything. In fact, in the culture he was brought in, if you went into trance, it was abhorrent. I mean, that was bad, bad stuff. It's like being a witch in the Catholic church, you know. So they were surprised that he'd had this experience. So anyway, 20 years went by, literally, and there was no word from the 9 or anything happening. And then, as I told some of you about my trip to Israel and finding out that Uri Geller was backed by an extraterrestrial civilization, and he moved my watch by just going like this over it. And then I began to get information directly at that point from the 9 to the clock. But I didn't know it was information. All I knew was the clock stopped and started. It took me from 1972 to 1975, about a 3-year period to crack the code, and it turned out to be a rational code. And the reason I was sure it was the right code was that it was predicting events that would happen in the future very precisely, and I'd wait till the time came and events would happen. So I gradually built up confidence. I didn't tell anybody about this until about 1978, and I began to talk about it to a few friends. And I finally released all the information about the nine and about the tapes and about the clock business in 1982. And that thing I mentioned to you earlier, if you want to get the tapes, you can write for them. So my association with these nine principles that run the universe, which they said you can think of us as God, but we're really not a single unitary, person. We're just principles, abstract forms, and we created the universe and we destroyed blah blah blah, and we did all this sort of stuff. It's pretty heavy stuff, to like Moses being talked to by Yehovah from the mountaintop, and a lot of UFO contacts and experiences and so on. So that, in a nutshell, that gives you a picture of what it's all about. Okay. There's a lot more to it, but that's the thin envelope. You are the leaders of the nine. They're the Aleph, the beginning, and Top, which is the end of the nine. And they always sign the message if it's an important message. Sometimes I just am given short information, very short, and it's not signed. But all the important stuff, particularly predictions for life on this planet, are always signed. You notice that it's a little awkward to talk about this thing because it's kind of a personal thing. And it's like somebody telling you about their prayers. I'm not making prayers, but a lot of it is privileged communication. A lot of it is clearly stated, this is secret and not to let anybody know it, and so on. So, but it's a continuing relationship. The nine speak of the most important principle in the universe is free will. Nobody can override anybody's free will. And for example, they tell me that when I get this information from them, I'm free to act on it as I wish. I still have the free will, and that's very important. They also say they're not overriding my free will. They said before I came into this life, I agreed to do this job. And so I'm just carrying out what I already agreed to. Nobody bent my arm. Free will choice. So the whole situation is free will. For example, I've painted a rather dismal scenario that the nine had given me as to what's going to happen, and I've gone into some of the mechanisms. But they also say, a very recent conversation, that mankind, and I mentioned this last night, has got so much potential in terms of what he can do, that he can override this whole scenario, and there's no determination. He will make his future. But again, that in a way becomes a probabilistic or stochastic process, and that it can't happen just because one person is going to do it, or 10% of the population. You've really got to get a majority of the people that say, we're going to do it, and we're going to straighten this thing out. Now, in a democratic society like ours, there's absolutely no reason why, if all of us decide to do something, no matter how impossible it starts, we can go out and do it. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced, and it's not wishy-washy thinking, because one of my roles in the modern world has been to illustrate the power of the mind. That's why I've worked with these great psychic surgeons who carve you open and take pieces out and put pieces back in, and people like Geller who've done metal bending, and others who do teleportation and dematerialization and so on and so on. So all these things are little indices which almost anybody can learn to do, as we found out.